Welcome everyone. It is Thursday, and if you're on the East Coast, it's noon, and so it's time for a disruptive conversation. We're going to be meeting today with an extraordinary author and educator, Estelle Erasmus, and waiting for her to come on, and we're giving you all a chance to come on and be here with us. One of the great things about Thursdays for me is being in conversation. And whenever we're in conversation, like you never know what can happen. We're not scripted. We let the conversation, flow and evolve. And when minds come together and when there's curiosity and openness, extraordinary things can happen. So one of the thoughts I'd like to share with you today is what makes a great day for you? So at the end of the day, how do you know that you've had a great day? What is it that needs to happen? What informs you in that way? And think about it for just a second as I'm waiting for Estelle to come on. What makes for a great day for you? What checks that box for you? And as you do that now, Estelle has joined us, and I'm waiting to see her invitation for wanting to come on. All right, Estelle, we've got part one, and now here she goes. She's requested. Leslie, it's always a little bit of wonderment with Instagram Live, and here she is.
Hi.
Okay. Hi, fantastic. Okay, here we are. Welcome, Estelle. So I'm going to introduce the show, introduce myself, introduce you, and then we're off and running. So welcome everyone to Disruptive Conversations with entrepreneurs, thought leaders, influencers, journalists, educators, in which we deep dive into the experiences these women have needed to navigate and conquer in order to have achieved their personal and professional success up to this point in time. And today I am delighted to be with Estelle. And before I do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. For those of you who are joining for the first time, I'm Dr. Risa Reiger, clinical psychologist, and I'm an expert in change. And the good news is that positive change can happen at any point in time. You're never too late. And in order to make positive change, we need to disrupt. We need to disrupt a thought, a feeling, a belief, a behavior in order to achieve our most wonderful and 10.0 lives. And in order to do so, we have Estelle here with us today. Estelle, I'm going to hydrate with you, my friend. And it's kind of a cool cup. These aren't mine. We have Estelle with us today to help us on that journey. And Estelle Erasmus is an award-winning journalist. She's the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, named Best Books for Writers by Poets and Writers magazine. She's a contributing editor for Writer's Digest and the host of Freelance Writing Direct. She's an adjunct instructor at NYU School of Professional Studies Center of Publishing and Applied Liberal Arts, where she received the 2023 Teaching Excellence Award. She's written over 150 publications. And in addition to that, she has been invited to give a TEDx talk at Boston College. And so without another moment going by, Estelle, thank you so much for coming on and joining us today. And I'm so ready to have a disruptive conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Risa. And I also want to thank our mutual friend, Bobby Ravel, for putting us in contact.
Bobby, thank you very much, because it's all about connecting, and amazing people know amazing people. And so when we're able to do that and parlay one of our most precious resources, which is the people that we know and the people that we have in our lives, it is such a win-win-win all across the board. Yes. So Estelle, what is it that you needed to have disrupt inside of yourself in order to have achieved your personal and professional success up to this point in time?
Yeah. Well, I started out in magazines in the 1990s, and back in the day, you could move very quickly up once you understood the lay of the land and how the magazine worked. And so I really familiarized myself with every aspect. I started at Woman's World magazine in the beauty department, and I was an associate beauty editor after having worked in beauty in public relations and other PR jobs. So that was my first foray into magazines, and I really learned. I had 7 deadlines a week. I was meeting every expert at the time in the beauty industry in the 90s, from Frederick Fekkai to Orbet to Mariana and Christine Valmy to Georgette Mossbacher, just all the big ones. I had tea at the Plaza with Ivana Trump. I met everybody who was kind of anybody in that day and age. And what happened was when later on, as I moved up, I moved from there to a magazine called American Woman, and I was a senior editor. And then I was at a magazine called Woman's Own, and I was editor-in-chief. And then I launched magazines. At some point, when I was in between jobs, I felt that I was my title, right? So who am I if I'm not, the editor in chief? Why am I still valuable? And I had to really have a moment where I reckoned with myself, and it took a while because I really did identify by my title. And if I didn't have my title, what was I? And so what I decided was I wasn't just my title, I was a sum of my skill sets. And those skill sets included research, interviewing, networking, being somebody who was a pop culture vulture, like being in the know, gathering information. I always tell my students, information is power. And the more information you can gather, that is a form of power. And people are astounded that I know so much about so many aspects of the industry, but I keep my nose kind of, I guess they say nose to the ground to just catch the scent of whatever is going on, because then you can catch with the trends, you can do the things that will keep you in a position of power that is not related to position.
Hmm. You bring up such an important point that people can get wrapped up and really have their identities very much be about and be defined by the title that they have. And so, how did you go about transcending that? Because when people have that kind of shift, there's not just how do I introduce myself, but what does that mean in terms of how I relate to myself?
Yeah, it was hard for me. It was definitely difficult because, it wasn't a, today I feel like people naturally pivot from job to job, from gig to gig. Back in the 90s, it wasn't a gig economy. It was that old construct that you stay in a job for 20 years. I was never that person to stay in a job for 20 years. Number one, I consume all the knowledge and information I need, and then I'm ready to move on. Number two, I, need to keep stimulating myself so things can get boring. And number three, I just was always not that person that just followed the crowd. And so today, I think that's more celebrated than it was back then. But I made it work for me eventually by launching magazines for publishers and being a bit entrepreneurial when people weren't really being entrepreneurial, which allowed me to do a number of things. I mean, the old magazines was a very hierarchical structure, but since I worked for, sorry,
Oh,
can you hear me?
Wait, you said it was a hierarchical structure. Could you explain that a little bit
It
more?
was a very top-down management style. So if you were the publisher, you were at the top of the mountain. The editor-in-chief or the editorial director, both roles that I've held, was the next. And it was really, you just dictated the terms of what the underlings would do, to be perfectly honest. And so it was hierarchical, which means that you don't need to exactly persuade anyone to do what you want. They did what you wanted them to do because you were in a position of power. Because of that, it wasn't my mentoring ability, which I think is really strong in me and which I help my students and the people that I teach and all that. I don't think it came into full flower until after I left corporate America, because it wasn't really encouraged in those days. It was like, if they're on a lower level than you, they're just going to help you do what you need to do. So I had to be tough. It was a tough, publishing was a tough industry. And there are very few people who are still around from those days of the 90s and the early aughts when I was in publishing, because it changed so much. And if you couldn't change with it,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't work. And I did. I changed with it. I mean, and my life changed, right? I was a single magazine editor. I was the dating diva. I taught people how to date at the seminar center and the learning annex while dating myself and being a magazine editor-in-chief and going on talk shows. And so that was really fun. But then I got married. And then in midlife, in my 40s, and I had my daughter in my 40s. She's a teenager now. And it really changed everything. And so I left corporate America behind because I wanted to be there for my daughter as much as I could. And I got involved in a show called Listen to Your Mother, where you read an essay out loud. It's like a moth-like show. I read an essay that I had written about being a mother. And I had never written a really deeply personal essay before. I'd always been a strict journalist. I'd always been somebody who researched and interviewed, and I could write articles with my eyes closed and my hands tied behind my back. But writing a personal essay pulled a different part of me out, and it was much more vulnerable. Being on stage with all the other wonderful people who spoke in that show, including Elisa Reiner, who ended up being Fig in Orange is the New Black, and Patty Chang Anker, who wrote the book Some Nerve about facing her fears, and Amy Wilson, who has a new book out called Happy to Help, and all these people, and she was the director, they were doing something different than I'd ever done before, and that was called blogging. And I said, what is this blogging? And they said, and I didn't even tell anyone that I was had been a magazine editor-in-chief, because you're only as good as your last gig. And that gig had been 7 years earlier. And in between, I'd been working in medical education in a high role, but working with physicians, completely different, but giving me important skill sets. And we'll get back to skill sets. So the bloggers said, they said, we're blogging. And I said, what is blogging? I said, did they pay you? And they said, no. We write our words and we should share what we're feeling. And I said, let me try that. And so I taught myself blogging. I set up a site. I called it Musings on Motherhood and Midlife. And I wrote blogs. And my blogs started getting shared widely and started getting accepted into publications that were sharing blogging pieces at the time. And it ended up that I went to blog her because one of my pieces, Help Make Little Girls' Voices Carry, was a blog her Voice of the Year. I also wrote about Marissa Meyer, who was then with Yahoo, and I said something like why Yahoo is now obsolete because she wanted everybody to go back to work who was working remotely. And so it opened up a whole new door for me because what were the bloggers doing? They were early on social media. They were the one who knew how to do Twitter. They were the one who taught me how to do Facebook. They were the ones. And so because I took in those new skill sets, by the time the rest of the populace caught up, I already had 13,000 followers on Twitter. I already had been building a platform. So I think it's so important to keep building your skill sets. If I had just relied on my skill sets back then, it wouldn't have been enough. But when I worked for smaller magazines or launch magazines, I did what the now digital editors are doing, working with, curating content, working with writers, but in a broader capacity. And so all of that, I take everything that I learn and I bring it to my students now. And so because I don't have the hierarchy, my only hierarchy is myself, although I understand hierarchical structures very well and I'm able to work with them and help my students navigate them.
Yeah.
I know I'm saying a lot.
There's
you got me going, Dr. Teresa.
Right. There's a lot to say, and now there's very much like, what's the next?
Yeah.
As soon as you're into something, there's already, while you're in it, it's already becoming the last, or it's on its way out. And then this idea of what's the next,
Yeah.
and seem to have have had a feel for that. And but it's an interesting thing to, what it takes inside of oneself to just say, I don't know what this is. I'm not sure how it's going to work, but I'm giving it a try. And just to share with you, when COVID started, here in New York, and we were going through what we were going through, I felt very much that I needed to get information up because I knew how to deal and how to be helpful during times of uncertainty and transition, ambiguity, and real alarm that people were feeling. And I was approached and asked to do a live stream. And at that point in time, I was like, absolutely yes, and just teach me how to do that.
That's wonderful.
And that that somehow you need to find that a confidence in yourself. And it doesn't mean that you have to start by going in with a room of people and be a public speaker. You don't need to do that. Hi, Abasan. Hope all is well. But you don't need to do that. It doesn't have to be that you go to your most frightening spot or the one that gives you the most angst. What do you think about that, Estelle?
I mean, I think that it used to be much harder for me because I never really, I think feeling that you don't fit in gives you a certain freedom.
Oh.
And I never felt that I fit in. And so because of that, I didn't have to. Maybe I wanted to, but I couldn't quite do it. I think being a creative person who is also resourceful, there's a churning that goes on. I don't know how to explain it. People say to me, how do you do everything you do? And it's something, an inner drive that I've always had, did not always understand, and was not always able to communicate to the people around me what was going on with me.
I want to highlight something that you just said.
Yeah.
And so that everyone really, because, conversationally it can get lost, but I wanted to, if I had a highlighter, I'd like, and highlight this, which is that you took not fitting in as a strength, And through not fitting in, that was a space of empowerment for you rather than feeling on the as an outlier and feeling like you didn't have a spot, which resonates so much with us because, you go to the cafeteria, like, do you have a spot there? Are people saving you a seat? And there's this feeling of like wanting to know that you're going to be sitting next to someone. And, but you took that, obviously you had your friends and your relationships, but you took not fitting in and you made it a space of let's go, green light, go get it, like move forward. And that's, so hear that, everyone. That's a special kind of nugget to take back of a shift in your mindset and your shift of how you can perceive. And that even though, and I was just having a conversation with someone this morning, even though there's something that happens, there's a lot of narratives we can give it.
Right. I think there's a movie that's with Heath Ledger, and it said something like, you could change your stars. And I do believe that. I do believe that you can.
I lost you.
What?
Oh, I lost your okay. Oh, you're back. I'm hearing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You heard what I said. There's a movie with Heath Ledger, and it's something about like, if it's written in the stars and you're like, what's written, change it. And I do believe that. And I'll give you one example. Recent. I had sent, one of my students sent me a beautiful essay. And I said, send it to this editor. And I wasn't sure how to spell the editor's name. It's a little complicated last name. I'm not going to say the editor's name. And I put it in because I had it in my email. So I put it in my email. I didn't take it out of my email. So when I sent it to the student, I also sent it to the editor. The editor emailed me back and said, thank you for thinking of me, but you don't need to include me on the email because if I'm interested, I'll get back to the student. So, when something like that happens, I mean, I'm a savvy, long-term magazine editor, writing teacher. You can look at it a couple of ways. You can be like, I'm so embarrassed, I'm so apologetic, I'm so sorry, the kind of genuflecting way, right? Or you can be kind of, oh, well, no big deal. Or you can think, this is a bit of a lemon. How can I make it lemonade? And so I emailed her back and I said, thank you so much. Yes, I inadvertently added you, but while I have you here, I have a podcast where I've had these editors, these agents, this publisher, top 3% of podcasts. Would you be interested? And I've written for you in the past with other colleagues. And she was like, absolutely.
That's a moment. And here's another, like, I'm taking my highlighter out and which is that when you have a moment like that, you could just, kind of fall back. And there are people who say, gee, so and so like was so lucky and this came to this other person and why doesn't it happen for me? And what happens is that you need to see it. You need to start really honing your skills, and everyone listening can do this, that we go into automatic response mode and we can miss our opportunities. If you're willing to hear a no and you feel like you can sustain that internally, look for your moment. Instead of a step back, step in.
Yeah.
And
I think yes, and I think even before offering the podcast, I said I would love you to speak to my students I could pay an honorarium. I mean, I had something of value that might be interesting, or it might not. There's a lot of editors that are just too busy; they can't do it, and I was prepared either way. But I wasn't gonna. What are they saying, Hamilton? You got to shoot your shot.
Yes, you gotta take your shot. You got to take your shot.
I do, and I talk about these stories in my book, Writing That Gets Noticed, about how I went up to David Pecker, who was at the time the CEO of Hachette Philippachi, which had George L. Mirabella. I came up to him at an event and spoke to him and knew, I believe that success is when preparation meets opportunity. Everyone told me not to go to him. And of course, when people tell me not to do something, don't have a kid in midlife, it's going to be too hard, you can't teach on a college level if you don't have an MBA, all that, an MFA, all that stuff. Of course, when somebody tells me I can't do something, I go right ahead and I do it. And then I do it, I bloom big, even if I bloom late. And so I went up to him and I talked about him. I talked about what he had done. And he said, had you ever been to Le Bernardin? And I said, no, I haven't. He said, here's my secretary's card. Call her in the morning and we'll set it up. And that's how I ended up being the editor for Body by Jake, a publication at Hachette. So you see, I just feel that life is, you have to address it in a certain way. And I could even see, I know I'm digressing, but like even on social media, when somebody is commenting about something, you can see their attitude about a situation. And the negative Nellies who just everything is woe is me all the time, you don't want to engage with that energy because it's not adding anything to anybody. You can feel sympathetic and empathetic, but it's a little bit of a stay away sign, I feel.
That's important. That's important to note. And even though, listen, we all have hard times, we all have down times, and we all have times when things are just not going as we would wish. Which, by the way, and I'm sure you've had this situation, it doesn't mean that you've done something wrong. It just means that we don't have guarantees. Everything has a degree of risk, and risk means that you're not sure exactly how it's going to pan out. And that's all we can do is step up for the risk. And you are a person who you see it, you know it, you were able to step into it because also you feel that if you do get the no, that you are not going to shatter and crumble.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes, yes, yes. So I'm a big advocate of therapy, and I have a therapist of decades. And she said, as you get stronger, you can handle things that happen because you know that you'll bounce, you won't break.
Yes. So we are coming to our time. I'm going to very quickly ask you, what's your next disruption? Like, give us the bullet point here.
Well, I was invited to give a TEDx talk at Boston College, and the topic is how to get noticed in your writing and beyond. And I just wanted to go viral. I wanted to help so many people, and I'm so excited to do that. And so that's that's a disruption because it's new to me and exciting. And I'm also working on a memoir based on my experience being the dating diva, working in magazines. And I had a piece that came out in Next Avenue PBS the other day connected to my memoir in progress. And so that's a disruption because I'm, writing in it rather than writing the nonfiction research-based book. There's still research involved, but this is more. It's my life. It's being very vulnerable. And but packaging it in a way that I know is going to get the reader excited and want to turn every page in a gripping, powerful way.
Estelle, thank you so much for coming on, sharing your heart, sharing your fabulous mind, your courage, your courageousness, your willingness to get in there and see if it shakes out this way, shakes out that way. Thank you so much. It's really been my pleasure to have this great conversation with you, fabulous disruptor that you are. And so let's take our cover shot. You may,
Okay.
okay. And so we'll be all set. And one more. And for anyone who may have missed the whole conversation today, we're going to be posting it. You'll find it on Instagram. Follow Estelle, follow me. Know that if you haven't followed me yet, start following me because I drop important information. I meet with fabulous people who really have a great deal to offer. See you next week, and we're going to have another great disruptive conversation. Look forward to seeing you there. And remember, I've saved a seat for you. See you next time. Thanks so much, Estelle.
Thank you. Bye-bye.